Story 1. Okay, so I might have made a mistake. Actually, I'm sure I made a mistake. But at the time, it didn't feel like one. It felt like exactly what I needed: a break. Some peace and quiet. Away from my ex blowing up my phone, from my friends offering terrible advice, and from the suffocating noise of campus life. The listing for the cabin made it seem perfect. Remote getaway in the woods. No Wi-Fi. No distractions. Just you and nature. It was cheap too. Less than $100 for the whole weekend. That should have been a red flag, but I was desperate. When I got there, it was fine. A little rundown, but cozy enough. One bedroom, a creaky twin bed, a tiny kitchenette, and a living room with an old couch that reeked of mildew. The best part was the view. A massive window facing the woods, sunlight streaming through the trees. The only thing that gave me pause was a note taped to the door. For your safety, the cabin is equipped with security cameras in the common areas and bedroom. This is for insurance purposes. The recordings are encrypted and stored remotely. Your privacy is guaranteed. Weird, right? But the note had a reassuring tone, and honestly, I didn't care. I told myself, it's for my safety. If anything happens, there'll be a record. The first day passed uneventfully. I read, went for a short hike, and fell asleep early, listening to the rustling of leaves and the occasional howl of a distant coyote. The second day was much the same. By Sunday afternoon, I was ready to leave. The peace and quiet had helped. I felt lighter, like I could face the world again. I packed up my things, cleaned up the cabin, and drove back to my apartment. It wasn't until a couple of days later that I got the email. Your security footage is available to review. Thank you for staying with us. I was lying in bed, scrolling mindlessly, and clicked the link out of curiosity. There were 3 video files, one for each night I'd stayed there. Each was several hours long, but I could fast forward through them. At first, it was boring. Just me sitting on the couch, eating instant ramen, flipping through a book. Nothing interesting. But then I got to the first night's footage of me sleeping. The camera in the bedroom was mounted high on the wall, aimed directly at the bed. The footage showed me lying there, dead to the world, a blanket pulled up to my chin. Fast forwarding through it, I noticed something weird. About an hour after I fell asleep, there was a flicker, like the camera had glitched. A faint blur appeared at the edge of the screen, near the closet door. It was barely noticeable, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I rewound and played it again, this time at normal speed. The blur wasn't a glitch. It was a person. They stepped out of the shadows, slowly, as if testing the air. Their features were indistinct, shrouded in darkness, but I could see enough. A tall figure with long limbs and a hunched posture. They moved soundlessly to the side of the bed, where they just stood. I froze, staring at the screen. My heart was hammering in my chest. How the hell didn't I wake up? The figure didn't do anything at first. Just stood there, leaning slightly over me. Then, after about 10 minutes, they stepped back into the closet, disappearing as silently as they'd appeared. I felt sick. I couldn't breathe. I told myself it had to be a joke, something the rental company did to scare guests. Or maybe someone really had broken in. But how could I not have noticed? I almost stopped watching. I should have, but I didn't. The second night's footage started the same way. Me, curled up in bed, blissfully unaware of what was coming. This time, the figure appeared much earlier. Around midnight, the closet door creaked open and they stepped out. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make out their face, but the camera's night vision turned their features into a pale, blurry void. Instead of just standing by the bed, they crouched. I couldn't look away. The figure crouched down, lowering their face just inches from mine. Their head tilted slightly, as if they were studying me. I could see the faint glow of their eyes in the infrared feed. Then, they reached out a hand and gently brushed my hair. I threw my laptop across the bed and scrambled backward, hyperventilating. I was shaking so hard I thought I might pass out. It was real. Someone had been there in that cabin, touching me while I slept. But why hadn't I felt anything? Why didn't I wake up? It didn't make sense. I stared at the laptop, terrified to keep watching, but unable to stop myself. I went back to the first day's footage from when I'd arrived at the cabin. I wanted to know how the figure had gotten in. Had they broken a window? Picked the lock? But But as I scrubbed through the video, my stomach dropped. The figure didn't come into the cabin. They were already there. The very first clip, from the moment I unlocked the door, showed the figure standing in the corner of the living room, perfectly still. I hadn't noticed them. They blended into the shadows, their body unnaturally rigid. They stayed there as I unpacked my bag, as I cooked dinner, as I sat on the couch reading. They didn't move an inch. I rewound further, to the hours before I arrived. The figure wasn't just standing there. They were waiting. I felt like I was going to be sick, but I couldn't stop. I had to know. I clicked on the last file, the footage from my final night. By this point, I was too numb to feel scared. I just needed answers. The figure came out of the closet again, just after midnight. This time, they didn't crouch. They climbed into bed. They climbed into bed with me. I watched in horror as they slipped under the blanket and lay next to me, their face turned toward mine. For hours, they just lay there motionless, as if they were mimicking me. And then around 4 a.m., they got up, walked to the corner of the room, and did something I'll never forget. They looked directly into the camera. Their face was pale and blurry, but I could see enough to recognize it. It was my face. I shut my laptop and sat there in silence, too scared to move. That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't slept since. I don't know what I saw or how to explain it, but every time I close my eyes, I see that thing, the thing with my face, standing in the corner, watching. And sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can feel someone brushing my hair. Story 2. It's funny how fast everything changes when you have a baby. Your priorities shift overnight, and your sense of normalcy twists into something unrecognizable. I used to sleep like the dead, but now the smallest sound jolts me awake. My husband says it's instinct, something primal, but he doesn't get it. He works nights, so he sleeps during the day while I'm home alone with Sophie. That's our daughter. She's 4 months old now, and the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But lately, I've been wondering if something's wrong. It started about 2 weeks ago. Sophie had been sleeping through the night for the most part, an absolute blessing for a new mom. But then, out of nowhere, she started crying. Not normal, hungry baby crying. This was different. Shrill, terrified, like something had startled her. I bought a baby monitor with a built-in camera shortly after she was born. It gave me peace of mind to be able to check on her from the bedroom or while making dinner. That night, when I heard her crying at 2 a.m., I grabbed my phone and opened the monitor app. She was lying in her crib, arms flailing, face scrunched in misery. I didn't see anything unusual. The room was still, bathed in the pale green glow of the monitor's night vision. I assumed it was just a nightmare, if babies even have those, and went to soothe her. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Out of curiosity, I opened the app to review the footage from the night before. The monitor records everything automatically, saving it for 24 hours. At first, there was nothing, just Sophie rolling around in her crib, half asleep. But as I watched, something caught my eye, something small, almost imperceptible. In the corner of the frame, behind the crib, the wall looked wrong. I paused the video and leaned closer to my phone. There, faint but unmistakable, was the outline of a hand. Not just a shadow. A handprint pressed against the wall, fingers splayed wide. It wasn't mine. I would have noticed something like that when I went in to check on her. And it certainly wasn't my husband's. He'd been at work all night. I stared at the screen, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light or the camera's resolution distorting the image. Yeah, that had to be it. But deep down, I didn't believe it. The crying got worse over the next few nights. Sophie would wake up screaming at random hours, and every time I checked the monitor, I felt a gnawing unease. On the second night, I saw something new. As I replayed the footage, I noticed faint smudges on the wall behind the crib. They weren't there during the day. I checked, but at night, they showed up. Handprints, dozens of them, overlapping, like someone had pressed their palms against the wall over and over again. By the third night, I was too scared to sleep. I sat in bed, clutching my phone, watching the monitor feed like a hawk. At around 3 a.m., Sophie started crying again. This time, I didn't go straight to her room. Instead, I rewound the footage, and that's when I saw it. The wall wasn't just covered in handprints anymore. There was a face. It was faint, barely visible, but it was there, pressed against the wall just above the crib. Its features were blurred, but I could make out a mouth, slightly open, and two dark indentations where the eyes should have been. My blood ran cold. I slammed my phone down and sprinted to Sophie's room. When I got there, she was fine. She'd stopped crying on her own and was fast asleep. The wall behind the crib was pristine. No smudges, no handprints, no face. I didn't know what to think. Was I hallucinating? Imagining things out of exhaustion? But I wasn't imagining Sophie's terror. Something was waking her up. Something was scaring her. Last night it got worse. I'd finally managed to fall asleep after hours of staring at the monitor. But around 3:30 a.m., Sophie started crying again. The sound jerked me awake, and I reached for my phone out of habit. But when I opened the app, my heart stopped. The feed showed Sophie lying in her crib, wide awake and wailing. But there was something else in the room. Someone else. A figure stood in the corner, partially obscured by shadows. It was tall, with long arms that hung unnaturally at its sides. Its head was tilted, as if it were watching Sophie. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, slowly, the figure turned its head toward the camera. I dropped my phone, grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a bedside lamp, and ran to Sophie's room. I threw open the door, ready to fight, but the room was empty. No figure, no shadows. Just Sophie, crying in her crib. I picked her up, holding her close, and whispered that everything was okay. But it wasn't. I could feel it. When I finally worked up the courage to check the footage this morning, I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. The video started the same as before. Sophie crying, the figure in the corner. But then, something new happened. At around 3:34 a.m., the door to Sophie's room opened, and I walked in. At least, it looked like me. Same messy bun, same pajama pants, same oversized sweatshirt. But I don't remember getting up. I don't remember going into the nursery. The figure didn't react as I approached the crib. I picked up Sophie, rocking her gently until she stopped crying. Then, I turned and looked directly at the camera. My face was wrong. The features were mine, but the expression wasn't. It was too wide, too stiff, like someone wearing a mask. I smiled. Not a kind, motherly smile. Something else. Something predatory. And then the video ended. I don't know what to do. My husband thinks I'm losing it, but he wasn't there. He didn't see it. I haven't slept all day. I've been pacing the house, carrying Sophie everywhere with me, too afraid to let her out of my sight. Just now, I heard a creak coming from the nursery. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Slowly, I turned to look. The door to the nursery was open, and standing there holding Sophie was me. She smiled at me, the same twisted smile from the video. "Don't worry," she said, her voice soft and sickly sweet. "I've got her now." Story 3. When people hear what I do for a living, they usually ask the same thing. Have you ever seen a ghost? My answer is always no. Not in the way they're imagining. Anyway, most of the cases I take are hoaxes, misunderstandings, or people scaring themselves with their own imagination. That's the truth I tell myself every time I walk into a new house. There's no such thing as ghosts. But this house, this was different. It started like most cases. A young couple with 2 kids contacted me about their home. They'd only lived there for 3 months, but strange things started happening almost immediately. They'd hear whispering in the middle of the night, see shadows darting across the walls, and find things move to places they hadn't left them. The breaking point came when their 5-year-old son, Ethan, started saying he couldn't sleep because of the people in his room. When they asked what he meant, he'd say things like, "They stand in the corners, but they don't talk to me." That's when they called me. When I arrived at the house, I could see how desperate they were. Sarah and Mike, the parents, looked pale and exhausted, like they hadn't slept in weeks. Ethan clung to Sarah's leg, while his baby sister, Abby, squirmed in her crib. "I don't know how much longer we can stay here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "It's like the house is watching us." "Let me take a look," I said, pulling my equipment bag from the trunk of my car. The house was a typical suburban 2-story, nothing special. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it, a heaviness like the air was thicker than it should be. I started with a walkthrough. No cold spots, no strange EMF readings, nothing out of the ordinary. But when I stepped into Ethan's room, my skin prickled. The air felt different there, almost electric. "This is where he says he sees them?" I asked. Sarah nodded, standing in the doorway. "Every night." I set up the cameras in all the usual spots. One in the living room, one in the master bedroom, one in Ethan's room, and one in the upstairs hallway. They were motion activated and equipped with night vision, perfect for catching anything unusual. "Give it a week," I told them. "I'll come back, review the footage, and let you know what I find." I didn't think much would come of it. I never do. But when I returned a week later, the family was gone. Their house was dark and silent when I pulled up. The curtains were drawn, and their car was missing from the driveway. I knocked, then rang the doorbell. No answer. After waiting a few minutes, I called Sarah. The line went straight to voicemail. I tried my next. Same result. It wasn't like them. They'd seemed so eager to get answers, so desperate for help. I figured maybe they'd left in a hurry and forgotten our appointment. The cameras were still in place, though, so I let myself in and retrieved them. The house felt different this time, emptier, colder. I told myself it was just because the family wasn't there, but that didn't stop the unease creeping up my spine. Back in my office, I uploaded the footage and started reviewing it. The first couple of nights were boring. A few creaks here, a few flickering lights there, but nothing I couldn't explain. It wasn't until the third night that things started to get weird. Around 1:30 a.m., the living room camera caught the front door opening by itself. There was no one there, no draft, no reason for it to move. A minute later, it closed again. In Ethan's room, the camera picked up a faint whispering sound. It was quiet, barely audible, but when I turned up the volume, I could make out words. "He's watching us." My stomach tightened. Who was watching? The whispering grew louder over the next few nights, spreading to the other cameras. By the fifth night, it was everywhere, like static but layered with voices. "We see you. We know you. Come closer." I paused the video and rubbed my temples. My head was pounding. I don't scare easily, but this was unsettling. I kept going, skipping ahead to the last few nights. The footage from Ethan's room stopped me cold. At first, everything seemed normal. Just the boy sleeping in his bed, tangled in a mess of blankets. But then I noticed something in the corner of the room. A figure. It was faint, barely more than a shadow, but it was there. A tall, thin figure standing in the corner, completely still. I rewound the footage, trying to figure out when it had appeared. It was there all night, not moving, not breathing, just watching. In the master bedroom, it was the same. Another figure standing in the corner near the closet. I checked the living room camera. Another figure. They were everywhere. I was shaking by the time I got to the last clip. It was from the first day when I'd set up the cameras. I watched myself walk through the living room, fiddling with the equipment, adjusting the angles. And then I saw it. Behind me, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. It was standing just a few feet away, close enough to whisper in my ear. And that's exactly what it was doing. The sound was faint, but when I turned up the volume, I could hear it clearly. "You shouldn't be here." The video ended. I don't know what happened to the family. Their phones are disconnected, and their house is abandoned. I can't stop thinking about those figures standing in the corners, watching. And last night, when I closed my office, I swear I saw something. A shadow, standing in the corner. Story 4. I'm not paranoid. Let's get that out of the way. I don't check under beds, I don't look for bugs in my coffee, and I definitely don't analyze every stranger who glances my way. I keep my head down, get my job done, and move on. So when I checked into the hotel that night, during one of the worst storms I've ever driven through, I wasn't thinking about shady management or hidden cameras. I just wanted to sleep. The place was exactly what you'd expect for $60 a night. Peeling wallpaper, a damp carpet smell, and a complimentary bar of soap that crumbled in your hand. The woman at the front desk barely looked up as she slid the key card across the counter, mumbling something about checkout being at 11. The room itself wasn't much better. The bedspread was an ugly maroon color with stains I didn't want to think about, and the ancient TV buzzed faintly, even when it was off. But it was the smoke detector on the ceiling that caught my attention. There was a tiny, circular hole drilled right into the middle of it. At first, I figured it was just bad maintenance. Maybe a wire had been pulled through, or someone had tried to install a different kind of detector and gave up halfway through. Either way, I ignored it. I didn't think about that hole again until 3 days later when I got the call. "Mr. Andrews?" the voice on the other end said. "This is Detective Green with the local police department. Were you a guest at the roadside earlier this week?" Yeah," I said, frowning. "Is something wrong?" There was a pause. "I need to inform you that the hotel is currently under investigation. We've uncovered a number of hidden recording devices installed in several rooms." My stomach dropped. "Recording devices?" "Cameras," the detective said bluntly. "We're still collecting evidence, but it's possible your room was affected. We'll need to speak with you in person, and if you'd like, we can arrange for you to review any footage that may have been taken during your stay." I hung up and stared at the wall, trying to process what I'd just heard. Cameras in the room, watching me. Curiosity eventually got the better of me, and I agreed to review the footage. A part of me wanted to just forget about it, but another part, the part that couldn't stop thinking about that hole in the smoke detector, needed to know. When the detective handed me the flash drive, he gave me a grim look. "Let us know if you notice anything unusual," he said. "We're still trying to figure out how far this goes." I went home, plugged the drive into my laptop, and opened the first file. The footage was grainy, the kind of quality you'd expect from a cheap, low-end camera. The angle was fixed, looking down from the ceiling. It showed most of the room: the bed, the desk, the bathroom door. I felt a wave of nausea as I saw myself walk into the frame, drop my bag on the bed, and sit down with a groan. It was so strange watching myself like that, like I was spying on a stranger. For the first hour or so, the footage was painfully mundane. Me flipping through channels on the TV, brushing my teeth, staring out the rain-streaked window. But then things got weird. The first thing I noticed was the bathroom door. At one point, I had gone in a shower and shut the door behind me. I was sure of that. But on the footage, about 10 minutes after I closed it, the door slowly swung open. No one was there. I paused the video, rewound it, and watched again. The door didn't open quickly, like it had been blown by the wind. It opened slowly, deliberately, as if someone was on the other side, pushing it with care. I fast-forwarded to when I came out of the bathroom. The door was closed again, just like I remembered. I kept watching, and the footage got worse. At around midnight, I was asleep in bed, curled up under the maroon comforter. The camera's night vision mode had kicked in, bathing the room in an eerie green light. For a while, nothing happened, just me tossing and turning. But then I noticed something in the corner of the screen, the air vent on the wall. There were eyes, two faint, reflective orbs staring out from inside the vent. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The eyes didn't move. They just stayed there, unblinking, watching me sleep. I closed my laptop, trying to calm the rising panic in my chest. This had to be a joke, right? Some kind of sick prank? But who would do something like this? I opened the laptop again and skipped to the end of the footage. That's when I saw it. It was morning. I was packing my bag, getting ready to leave. The camera captured me zipping up my suitcase, slipping on my shoes, and grabbing my keycard from the desk. But just before I left the room, I turned to face the camera, and I smiled. Not a normal smile. It was wide, too wide, stretching my face in an unnatural way. My eyes didn't look right either. They were darker, emptier, like they weren't mine anymore. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I didn't remember doing that. I didn't remember looking at the camera at all. The footage ended there. I haven't been able to sleep since. I keep thinking about those eyes in the vent and that smile. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see it again. My own face staring back at me, smiling. Story 5. I didn't think much of it at first. Little things go missing all the time when you live with roommates, right? A granola bar here, a pair of socks there. It's part of the trade-off for splitting rent and living on a student budget. My roommate, Greg, and I didn't exactly have a lot of money, but I thought we got along fine. We both kept to ourselves for the most part, and I figured we had an unspoken agreement to leave each other's stuff alone. But then it started happening more often. At first, it was just my food, stuff I knew I hadn't eaten. An entire leftover pizza disappeared one night, leaving the empty box on the counter like some kind of sick joke. Then it escalated to my personal items. My laundry detergent went missing. A hoodie I loved was gone for 3 days before it reappeared on the back of my chair. folded like it had been freshly washed. Greg denied everything when I confronted him. He just shrugged and said, "I don't even eat pizza, man." And maybe he didn't. Greg was weird, sure, but he wasn't the sneaky type. He mostly stayed locked in his room, headphones on, yelling at people over Discord or whatever game he was obsessed with that week. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was messing with me. That's when I decided to set up the camera. I borrowed an old webcam from a friend and positioned it in the corner of my room, hidden among a pile of books on my desk. It was cheap, but it would do the trick. I didn't tell Greg about it. I wanted to see if he'd sneak in when he thought I wasn't looking. That night, I made a big deal about leaving the apartment to go study at the library. I left my room unlocked, grabbed my backpack, and slammed the door behind me. Then I snuck back in through the fire escape and waited in the bathroom with the lights off, phone in hand, watching the live feed from the webcam. Nothing happened. No creaking door, no shadowy figure, no roommate raiding my snack stash. Eventually, I went back to my room feeling both stupid and a little disappointed. I shut off the camera and went to bed, figuring this whole thing was in my head. The next morning, I decided to review the footage just to confirm that I was being paranoid. I skipped through most of it, me leaving, the empty room, me coming back. But then I noticed something strange. At around 2 a.m., the closet door opened. It was slow at first, barely a crack, and then it swung open just enough for someone to slip through. And that's exactly what happened. A man crawled out. He moved on all fours, his limbs too long and awkward, like he didn't quite know how to use them. His face was pale, his eyes wide and glassy, and his hair hung in greasy strands over his forehead. He crept to the edge of my bed, sitting there like he belonged there, staring at me while I slept. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing. My mind screamed at me to delete the footage, to pack up and leave right then and there. But I couldn't. I had to know if it was real. I forced myself to keep watching. Over the next several nights, the same thing happened. The man emerged from the closet around 2 a.m. every night without fail. Sometimes he'd sit on the edge of the bed just watching. Other times, he'd crouch in the corner, his head cocked at an unnatural angle, like he was listening for something. But the worst was the fifth night. That time he spoke. "You shouldn't have let me in," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the white noise of the video. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. What did he mean let him in? I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I stayed awake with every light in the apartment turned on, a baseball bat clutched in my hands. The next day I called the police. They didn't believe me at first. I get it. Imagine someone telling you there's a man living in their closet who sneaks out every night to watch them sleep. But once I showed them the footage, their skepticism turned to cold, hard silence. They searched the apartment, tore apart the closet, and even checked the air vents. Nothing. The man was gone. "You should probably find somewhere else to stay," one of the officers said, his face pale. Just in case. I didn't need to be told twice. I packed up everything I could fit into a couple of suitcases. I wasn't sticking around to find out if the guy was coming back. Greg didn't seem surprised when I told him I was leaving. He just muttered something about subletting my room and went back to his computer. As I was shoving the last of my clothes into a bag, I decided to check the closet one last time. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof that I wasn't crazy, that this really happened. That's when I saw it. Taped to the back wall of the closet was a photograph. It was a picture of me, lying in bed, sound asleep. And in the photo, the closet door was open. The date scrawled in the corner was from 3 weeks before I'd even moved in.